Hello and welcome to the Global Dialogue. I'm Shireen Bhan, and it is our pleasure to welcome on the show the Global CEO of Novartis, Vas Narasimhan. Vas, many thanks for joining us here on CNBC-TV18. It's great to have you here in India.
Great to be here, Shireen. Thanks a lot for the invitation.
Well, since you are here in India, let's start by talking to you about the plans that Novartis has for India. You've got a fairly large presence in Hyderabad, development center, one of the three that you globally have. What's the plan now in terms of expanding capacity and capability there?
You know, over the years, actually now since 2005, we've been able to build an over 10,000 strong presence in India, both with our Indian business, but also with this corporate center where we cover pretty much all of the key functions within Novartis, ranging from development, research functions, all the way up through our advanced analytics, AI, and other capabilities. We plan to continue to invest and expand. I mean, we think that Hyderabad is an incredible location for talent. And so for us as a corporate center, India has become a really key location.
So what will that mean in terms of incremental investments over the next 5 years?
Well, I think we've already have over $300 million we generate, we believe, for the Indian economy in terms of investments. And I think we'll continue to invest, probably not a specific figure, but I would see continued expansion in that facility. I mean, when you look at it over the years, we've gone from 1,000 to 5,000 to 7,000. Now we're over 9,000. And we continue to look to bring more things into our Hyderabad location.
On the manufacturing side, is there an aspiration to beef up capability and expand on the manufacturing side as well?
We already have one manufacturing center here in our Sandoz business. I think beyond that, where we really focus right now is what we call our technical development capabilities. So a lot of our technical operations where we do a lot of the drug chemistry, some of the other things, that's what we do right now in Hyderabad. I think longer terms in terms of manufacturing, we're not in need of more capacity at the moment.
Let me talk to you about what we can expect as far as the portfolio in India specifically is concerned. You've already divested some of your drugs here to JB Chemicals, Dr. Reddy's. Is that likely to be something that you continue to do? And in terms of the global pipeline, what will you bring to India?
When you think about our Indian story, it parallels our global story. And I would be remiss if I didn't tell the longer history of Novartis. I mean, we started out as a chemistry company, a dye-making company. So our relationships with India go back to the 1800s. And then really formative relationships in pharmaceuticals starting in the 1940s. You know, since that time, we've evolved from a healthcare conglomerate. And then over the last 5 years, with $100 billion of transactions, transformed into a pure-play innovative medicines company, where we really try to be at the leading edge in 5 therapeutic areas, places like cardiovascular disease, cancer, neurological disease, and then these new technology areas which we think can transform medicine. And we now try to bring that innovation to India consistently and at scale. So some of the things that I think I'm excited about are in cardiovascular disease. We have a drug called Entresto for heart failure. And now we try to bring a drug called Leqvio for high cholesterol. We also have done a lot in immunology with our whole immunology franchise, another area I'm interested in. And probably the big area now is cancer. And how can we be one of the lead partners with India in cancer? The last part of the story, which is probably people don't know as much about, is the amount of work Novartis does in leprosy, malaria, sickle cell disease, diseases that also affect the broader range of the Indian population.
You know, I'm glad that you brought that up, and specifically as far as sickle cell disease is concerned, this is something that made its way into the budget for this year in the finance minister's speech as well. But even on issues like malaria, and I think the concern has been that not enough R&D dollars are going into addressing some of these high disease burden challenges. So give me a roadmap of what we can expect as far as Novartis is concerned.
I mean, Novartis has a long history of investing in tropical diseases. I mean, we just recently committed in the Kigali Declaration in Rwanda, hosted by a range of global leaders, $250 million to continue to invest in research in these areas. Our history goes back actually 30 years in malaria, where we were the company to pioneer a drug called Coartem, which is the most widely used anti-malarial in the world. Now going forward, we have a dedicated R&D center. We're working on novel anti-malarials. Clinical trials are ongoing right now in Africa and India with the idea to get even better treatments for patients with malaria. But then we also work on new diseases. You know, when you think about areas like leishmaniasis, cryptosporidiosis, which is a type of diarrheal disease, and of course sickle cell disease, as we discussed. And I'd be remiss if I didn't also mention that, you know, we are the only supplier, global supplier of drugs to treat leprosy. So our partnerships in leprosy span across India and are really fundamental to our ethos in the country.
So what are the big challenges that you face from an Indian perspective at this point in time? I understand that it's an important strategic market from a capability point of view, and that's what you're hoping to expand on, but not necessarily as a commercial market at this point in time. Yeah. It's not one of your focus markets. What's the expectation in terms of growth going forward?
You know, there's so much potential here, for sure. And I think as the middle class continues to grow in India, the demand for more healthcare is going to continue to increase. India also has world-class medical centers. When you think about research, development, we're the leading multinational in doing clinical trials in India at the moment, so it's quite significant. I think the challenge now is for India to make the transition from being a primarily generics market to trying to support innovative medicines. And other countries have made that transition, most notably China. China decided to really forcefully look at IP and data protection, start to create a national reimbursement framework, modernize their drug regulator, and as you know, China has a really blossoming biotech sector. I think over the next decade, India can make that transition. And if India makes that transition, I would expect a large biotech sector to also come up here. Also, the diaspora could start to come back as well and really create those companies.
You know, you talked about the diaspora, and this gives me the perfect segue to address the issue that everyone's talking about, the number of Indian origin CEOs who are running global corporations today, Vas, and you're one of them. When you hear about, people talk about this, there's almost this collective sense of ownership. How do you feel about this?
I mean, I think it's amazing on the one hand, and I think a lot of it comes down to why I would think about it is our forefathers and grandmothers and grandfathers who worked so hard to give us the opportunity, give somebody like me the opportunity to be educated in the U.S. and have all of the opportunities that I have. So I always think you stand on the shoulders of giants, and there must have been many giants walking around India, 50, 100 years ago.
If so many of you made it to the top.
It's extraordinary. It's extraordinary. So we've never all gotten together to really discuss how it happened, but I certainly know many of the other, and I know they all feel a lot of pride about it.
But why do you think we're seeing this? I mean, yes, we are today we have a large population, but so does China, and yet we don't see Chinese executives making it to the roles of global CEOs heading global corporations. What do you think is specific or unique to why we're seeing this happen?
You know, it's hard to say. I think a few things. I mean, certainly the emphasis on education in Indian communities is so strong. So anywhere in the world Indian communities go, of course, there's such a drive. I even have it with my own children, right? Drive to educate, which I think creates a lot of opportunity then for highly educated individuals. I think also what I observe, at least, is Indians are able to adapt to very different situations. I mean, I'm an ethnically Indian. I was born in Pittsburgh in the United States. I've lived all over the world, and now I'm a CEO of a Swiss company, right? And so you have to be able to adapt, and I think Indians are pretty good at that, and I think that makes a big difference.
Yeah, I would imagine that does. But let's talk about Novartis and your journey and your mission to create an innovative drug company that you aspire for trust as well as higher multiples. Now, the multiple part, the value part, I get, because if you do move towards this innovative pipeline, you hope to extract better multiples from the market. But on the trust aspect, because that has been a challenge for the pharmaceutical industry, if you look at any of the congressional hearings, whether it's in the US or the EU, that continues to be a problem, not just a perception problem, but a very real problem that plagues the pharmaceutical industry. How do you intend to earn trust, and what does that mean specifically from a Novartis point of view?
When you look at the trust journey of this industry, it's gone through ups and downs over the decades. In the 80s and 90s, actually our industry was one of the most respected and trusted industries in the world. We're a little bit of a victim of our success. The more successful we've been at bringing new medicines to market, the more expectations society has had of us. And I don't think we've always been up to the challenge. I mean, I think we have to do better about explaining how we price our medicines and how we try to price the medicines based on the value they create to society, as opposed to always thinking about cost. And I think that's one of the shifts we need to make.
Are you seeing that shift starting to happen, given the kind of backlash that we are seeing, as well as legislative backlash?
I think it is in certain instances, but it works better, of course, when we have highly transformative medicines. Then people really see the value. I think we have to be much more disciplined about explaining the message. And I think when you do that, you can get through. And overall, I would say on balance, if you look over decades, we've been pretty good at this. Otherwise, the industry wouldn't have grown to be $1 trillion plus industry. At the same time, we have to acknowledge the fact it just takes one actor in our industry to do something that's out of step with what societal expectations are, and the backlash comes on the whole industry. And so I think it's just going to take time, consistency, doing things like the things we talked about on tropical diseases and really making access a priority, trying to do the right things on investing in communities. I think if you do those things over time, hopefully we change the narrative. You saw with COVID, when we're able to bring vaccines and diagnostics to the world, very quickly our industry becomes a hero to the world.
Talking about the focused approach that Novartis has embarked on since 2022, and part of that is to exit businesses and spin off Sandoz, exit Roche, and so on and so forth. What's been the big cultural shift that you've also had to make within the organization to bring in this very laser-sharp focus on going up the innovation chain?
You know, when you think about our company, we're a knowledge industry. I mean, we're a knowledge company with knowledge workers. And one of the transitions when I became CEO in 2018, we started on was this idea of an inspired, curious, and unbossed organization. The idea that empowered people make better decisions, they're able to innovate. And that's been the journey we've been on as a company over these last 5 years, with the belief that if you're really pure play innovation, you're all about your people's ability to come up with incredible ideas and translate those ideas into products and services for your customers. And that's the journey we've been on. It's not always been easy, I can say. It's been bumpy along the way, especially when you're doing 100 billion of transactions, spinning companies, divesting things, restructuring. That causes doubt about your commitment to the culture. But I believe in the long run, over decades, for Novartis to be a successful pure play innovator, we've got to get this culture right. It's going to all be about empowered people, inspired to do their work, relentlessly curious about the external world. That's where the innovation comes from.
So how have you unbossed yourself?
Unbossed myself is a really good question. I think unbossed is a lot about personal accountability, you know, and so what we really try to say is instead of waiting for somebody else to tell you what to do, you've got to come up with your own narrative. And I've seen over the time as CEO, there are moments in time you have to find where you say, now is the moment to take the next step. Nobody told me in the first part of last year, let's take the next step in the transformation. Let's exit Roche. Let's spin Sandoz. Let's re-architect the whole Novartis structure globally. That's a moment in time you have to take personal accountability in my role as CEO and make the transformation happen.
But you know, this requires courage as well, because there are going to be questions asked, and there will be perhaps doubts, as you pointed out as well. How do you sort of find that confidence and the courage within to say, I am going to move ahead with this? Because in the short term, it might have, a different outcome.
I think a lot of this, for me at least, personally, is from the Indian heritage of growing up and learning about meditation, learning about exercises like yoga and pranayama, looking inside yourself to find an inner peace that allows you then to be courageous, because in a lot of ways then the psychological security you build inside your own mind. I mean, I really believe what my grandparents in the end taught me, which I didn't appreciate, I have to say, 20, 30 years ago, really comes back now, because that's where you find the strength. You won't find the strength from the external world, because rightfully reporters and investors will criticize and challenge. You have to find that strength from within. And they gave me those tools when I was a child and adolescent, and now I use those tools today as a global CEO.
But as you look at the journey today, you started this in 2022, where do you believe you find yourself in being able to execute?
Well, we actually started, if you go back, even in 2018. So we exited then the consumer health business.
GSK.
We spun Alcon. So we've had a long journey. I do think now we're getting to the point where, at least from my mind, the structure of Novartis is the right one. We are one of the largest, if not the largest, pure play innovative medicines company in the world. Operations in over 100 markets. We, in our innovative portfolio, reach almost over 250 million patients. We're in these 5 therapeutic areas. We have the right technology platforms. And now it's all about, in the next years, executing to showing we can consistently get great medicines out and get them to as many patients as possible. And then I think the multiples, the valuation, the financial performance will follow. So we really shift now, let's say in my second 5 years as CEO, from a transformation story to an execution story. And that's what we need to deliver on over the coming years.
what are you most excited about? You talked about the 5 focus areas that Novartis is working on, as well as the technology platforms. But in terms of gene therapy, in terms of cell therapy, in terms of breakthrough innovations, as you look at your portfolio today, what are you most excited about?
So this is a topic I love to talk about, because I mean the transformations have been incredible. When you think about it, for most of the history of our industry, we've been about chemical entities and then what we call biologic drugs. So a few types of medicines. And then over the last decade, we've had this explosion in science. When you think about all of the things that we've learned about human genome, RNA, cell therapies, and so now you see actual drugs approved. So Novartis, we're the largest gene therapy player in the world, and we have gene therapies. We're the largest radioligand therapy. It's a new technology that actually treats cancer, many solid tumors. We're the largest producer of RNA interference drugs in the world, which is this whole new area which allows you to silence proteins in the body to treat diseases. And what this does is it allows us to expand both the number of diseases we can treat, but also how we treat them. When I think about this drug Leqvio I mentioned, an siRNA, twice a year, and you're able to control cholesterol by 60%. And so this is where I think medicine is going to move, to these newer technologies, which on the first end will allow you to be at the high end. But on the other hand, for access to places like India, when you can get to very infrequently administered medicine for heart disease, imagine what we could do to the hundreds of millions of patients who need these medicines.
And that's what I wanted to talk to you about. Specifically when we talk about some of these breakthrough innovations, and we're starting to see some signs of, or at least some signs of experimenting here in India with CAR T therapy and so on and so forth. How do you make all of this accessible? How do you scale all of this up to be able to cater to needs of a population like India?
Again, it's going to be a long journey. It won't happen overnight. But when you go back again in the history and you look at biological drugs in the 1980s and 90s, people like us were probably sitting there saying, how will we ever get this to the masses? And now biologic drugs are available globally because we've been able to bring down the production costs over time. We've been able to scale up in new ways how to actually get the access to patients who need it. And this, of course, allows the access to happen. I think a similar story will happen. The first generation cell therapies are very complex and cumbersome. As we get better and better in Novartis labs, we're even thinking about ways to how do you make cell therapy just happen inside the patient so you don't need all of the complex architecture. Similarly, I think similar things could happen with gene therapy. With small interfering RNA therapy, these are already therapies I think you could get to the masses over time because the production costs have come down quite significantly.
What we saw through COVID, especially as far as the vaccine manufacturing was concerned, was the way that we could bring the time down for this to get to the market. With the kind of R&D spends, and you're doubling down on R&D expenditure at this point in time, what can we realistically expect in terms of time to market for some of the drugs that you're working on?
I think there will be some acceleration, but I think what's important to note is COVID was a very unique circumstance. I mean, here we really knew the disease, we knew the virus, we knew the disease, we understood the virus, and regulators felt very comfortable moving extremely quickly. I think what I observe now in global regulators is they learned how to accept trial data in new formats, how to allow us to run clinical trials much more quickly, but they also rightfully come back to a place where they want real hardcore evidence. And I really believe for the long run of our sector, you need strong regulators because the public has to trust the medicines. We see that also with COVID vaccines. The public has to trust what ultimately we come to market with. So I'm not so upset that in the end regulators go back and say, look, what is the right thing for cancer? What is the right thing for heart disease? Let's get the right standard for the right disease and then hold companies accountable.
And I agree with you that there is need for strong regulators and strong regulation. But what about harmonization of regulation, especially as we look at cross-border challenges? I mean, this is a universal issue that we're talking about. How do you see the need for harmonization as far as standards and regulation?
I think it's a great question, and it's been an industry challenge for a long, long time. I mean, so it's been really hard to get global regulators to look at these things in a similar way. Not a lot of progress has been made on the front. And I think it's an opportunity. I mean, if you think about the Indian regulator, how could they leverage what the Europeans do or the US does? How could they harmonize a lot of the work that they do? Because one of the things that then, of course, creates delays for patients getting access is when one regulator has a different set of expectations than another. So, for instance, many countries, including India, require local studies. And you could debate, maybe in some instances it's a good idea, But in many instances, the fact that we've already done thousands of patients all around the world, why do you want another local study to delay access? I think there's a lot more we can do on harmonization for sure.
You know, since we are talking about regulators and regulation, I just wanted to understand how you view the recent incidents that we've seen happen, where there have been Indian companies involved with incidents of spurious drugs, contaminated drugs, and so on and so forth, which the World Health Organization has acted against. How do you read those developments, and what do you make of them?
I think it's very concerning because, of course, you see, as a physician scientist, it's very concerning to see some of the impact of children, especially in some of the contaminated products. I think it really erodes the public trust that we've talked about earlier. We really need to have all companies, including companies in India, maintain the quality standards that makes the public trust our medicines. So I think it's very important we act quickly and that we get to the bottom of these situations, and then we raise the standards. And I think most countries, as they go through this journey to become more innovative, knowledge-based in their industries, including in biotechnology, they have to get the quality standards up. And so I think that's absolutely critical. And I think for India, and especially Indian companies, to become global players, you have to meet those quality standards. I mean, the US FDA is probably the toughest regulator in the world, and it's the largest market in the world. And so to make that transition, you have to get to the quality standard that the world expects.
You know, as you talked about how you're transitioning from a transformation journey now to the execution journey, what are the next milestones that you're going to be mapping as far as this journey is concerned?
Well, the big one is the expected spin of Sandoz, which would be
on track for the second half?
On track for the second half, and that's a very big undertaking. I mean, that's a 25,000 person spin. It's second large-scale spin we've done over the recent years after Alcon. So that's a big undertaking. That's one critical milestone. The next is we have a very large transformation program undergoing right now in the company, and really seeing through that this year so that the setup of the company is the right one. And then it'll come down to our 9 big global medicines that we think have multi-billion-dollar potential, and showing that each one of those medicines is on the right track. We have some very exciting launches, one in prostate cancer, another in blood cancers, another one ongoing in cardiovascular disease, this drug Leqvio. We really need to show these launches are on track as well. And I think if we get those 3 things right, then I think it'll really be an exciting story for us in the years to come.
And on the launch front, is the data telling you that you are on track?
Yes, absolutely. Actually, our big challenge in some of these launches, the demand is exceeding our initial expectations. So I think those are good signals. And I think the other thing that's happening now in the post-pandemic environment, we're seeing healthcare systems open back up, getting back up to normalization, particularly for us important in US, Europe, and China. We do expect China to normalize in the second half. And that gives a lot of tailwinds to the business, especially when you have launch medicines.
You know, one of the big issues that is currently being debated is, of course, the issue as far as patents are concerned. Evergreening continues to be a big challenge, and that is one of the accusations that is often made against Big Pharma. As you look at where we are today and the need for access, the need for affordability, you know, where do we find the balance?
Well, I think as many topics right now, everything goes to extremes, right? You have the extremes on the industry saying that we need to protect fully all of the innovations, and on the other side talking about evergreening. And the truth, of course, is in the middle. And really, what we need to find is the right patent frameworks, including in a country like India, that protects legitimate innovation. Because otherwise, high-end, high-science, technology-based industries can't thrive in a country. And I think there is a right middle ground. Certainly, the goal is not to do evergreening, but the goal is when you make legitimate innovations that improve the profile of a medicine, it should be protected. Data, regulatory data should be protected. IP should be instituted and then appropriately defended in a reasonable time frame. That's what creates an innovation ecosystem. And I think we can get there in most markets. The biggest concern I have globally is there is this push to pull back. And I think what that would do is damage many innovative sectors, not just ours. Because I think the patent framework is what allows human society to defend incredible technological advances. And if you start eroding that, you may not see it, but over decades, you will see innovation come down. And I think it would be better for society to really embrace the fact that we want to protect incredible innovations.
And find a middle path.
And find the middle path, yes.
So let me end by asking you, Vas, as a physician scientist and now CEO, you know, do you believe that your approach to this job is different because of that? And how do you see the role of science, innovation. I mean, how much can you speed up science? That's been the big question through the course of the pandemic, which you also addressed. But, you know, because of your background, do you see your role as CEO differently?
I do, I think. I mean, fundamentally, the numbers that animate me are maybe not the numbers that are in the income statement or in our balance sheet. It's
not
the
EPS.
It's the numbers of medicines we create for the world. It's the number of patients we reach with those medicines. I think what we sometimes lose in today's world, where we have so many great medicines and vaccines, is what an incredible story it is that for most of human history we had no medicines. You know, and in the end, in the last 150 years, we unpack 2 billion years of the evolution of a human cell, of any animal cell, in fact, and we find a single molecule that can transform the life of a cancer patient or transform the life of a heart disease patient. And the fact that we can do that again and again is an absolutely extraordinary achievement. I think of it, it's like building a rocket. I mean, we celebrate rockets when they go up into space. The fact that we find medicines...
Can we celebrate malaria drugs as much?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And if we could start to understand the magic that those medicines really are, that's what gets me excited. And every time we find a new technological advance that lets people live longer, healthier lives, that's pretty amazing.
Vas, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks so much for joining us here on the Global Dialogue. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Shireen.
Well, with that, it is time for us to wrap up this edition of the Global Dialogue. From all of us here on the team, goodbye and many thanks for watching.